Welcome to Tennessee Court Talk. I'm your host, Barbara Peck, and today we are talking about jury duty. This podcast is intended for the general public. My first guest is Judge Lee Davies from Williamson County. My second guest is Judge Stacy Street from Carter County in Upper East Tennessee. My third guest is Judge Valerie Smith from Memphis. And my fourth guest is Judge Wyatt Burk from Bedford County. Welcome to everybody.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. So jury duty, I think when people first get their jury summons and have to go to the court to report for jury duty, their first reaction may not be a positive one. But I wanted to do this podcast because I believe in my fellow Tennesseans, and I think that they just may not understand the importance of jury duty and the function of it in today's society. So first, Judge Davies, tell me, are jury still important, and is jury duty still important?
Absolutely. I think they're maybe more important now than they ever have been.
And why do you think that?
Well, there's kind of a feeling across this nation, I think, that maybe the government has got way too much authority. And the jury acts as a barrier in a lot of cases between the government and ordinary citizens. They make the decision as opposed to some bureaucrat.
So I think that's an interesting point because I don't think people realize that in our constitutional democracy, there's really two ways that people, regular citizens, participate directly, and that's obviously voting, and the second is jury duty. I mean, you can write your congressman or whatever, but that's not necessarily participating directly. So jury duty is an opportunity. So Judge Burk, tell me a little bit about, should jury duty be a point of pride?
Absolutely. When I think about jury duty, I think about 12 men and women getting together and deciding someone's guilt or innocence and how incredibly important that is. And when you talked about government's role, and as Judge Davies indicated, I think it was the Gettysburg Address where Lincoln said, a government by the people and for the people. Well, without jury service, that government is for the people. It's for those individuals to decide the guilt or innocence of that defendant, but it's also for the defendant. And so, I think it's vitally important, even more so today.
And Judge Smith, so you're a civil court judge. That's a little bit different than criminal court. In civil court, what is the role of a jury in a jury trial?
It's very similar to what you would have in a criminal trial. We have matters that have to be decided by a jury. Two parties can't agree over a civil dispute, and they have a right to a jury trial. Things such as a car accident, healthcare liability, a contract matter, have a right to a jury trial, and they need 12 citizens to make that decision for them because they can't agree.
And Judge Street, what about in your court? What's the role of the jury?
Well, I think what everyone said is correct, that when we do jury orientation, we bring the big panels in, whether it be in the first district. We have Carter County, a more populous county in Washington County, and then two mountain counties in Unicoi and Johnson. So when we do the jury orientation, I talk about all of these things we're talking about with them. And as far as their role, I said, when this state was founded, the country was founded, we didn't want the king or a king's appointee making the most important decisions in your life, whether it be life, liberty, or your property. In some cases we do that, but the most important ones, we wanted the jury to do that. And I asked him, I said, would you want the governor to decide whether you win, or would you rather have one of your citizens? And then where you talk about the voting and participation, I kind of turn that around on juries. When they come in, I tell them, I said, you rode in here today on good roads. Your children went to good schools today. You laid your head down last night and slept well under the protection of the government, under the protection of the sheriff's department. And I said, if you think about it, to live in the greatest country in the world, this government asks very little of you. Asks you to vote, asks you to pay your taxes, asks you to obey the crimes, and to serve on a jury. And that's a small price to pay for all of the freedoms and the privileges we have in this country. So I kind of turn that around. I kind of shame them a little bit if we can, but it's the truth. That's very little that the government asks of us. And jury service is that important, and I want to put that up there with all those other things. So they have that mindset when they come in, because it's that important to us, and it's that important to our system.
I do something very, very similar whenever I speak to a large jury panel, which in Shelby County would be both civil and criminal. It's just one big panel that we choose from. And I go maybe a step further, and I recognize veterans, have them stand up and say, if you don't want to serve on this jury and you don't want to vote, walk up to one of those men or women standing up and tell them that their service didn't mean anything to you. Today's the day to raise your hand, take your oath, and do your part.
This is what I end with on jury orientation. Every one of our counties, we have a veterans memorial, and they're big deals. And I tell them that if I'm in Washington County, I tell that the entire panel, this is the jury orientation. This is the day they get their summons. They're to report this day, and they've already tried to call everybody they know to get out of it, and we've told them no, and they come that day. This is what I end with. I said, right now there's some young man or young woman in Washington County, Tennessee, that's standing a post somewhere in this country for you to be here today. And I said, if you've got a reason that you think you need to be excused from jury duty, and I've already gone through all of the ones that I won't accept, I said, if you think you have an excuse, I want you to act like that young man or woman that's standing that post right now is standing right behind me. And if that excuse would be good enough for them, it may be for me. But if I don't think it would be good enough for them, it's not going to be for me. And that weeds out a lot of people that's going to come up there and say, well, I've got a bad back, or I've got my dog's got to go to the vet this week. Or it weeds a lot of those out, and it really does.
It does. I sometimes hear audible gasps whenever I say that, and I say, "Look,
I like the tears.
Yeah, yeah. I say this is harsh, but it's true. And today's the day to do your part, and we need you here to do it. We didn't invite you here for a good time. We got to have you. We all learned the hard way during the height of COVID that the really important thing you need for a jury trial is jurors, and if you don't have them, we can't move the cases and we can't get things done."
Sometimes, I'm sure everyone's heard the bogus excuse, and I'll get that early on, and I will say, that's not acceptable, and you can go sit in the box with everybody else, or you can sit in the courtroom for the entire trial, and you'll learn about jury duty, and you make an example out of them, and then that's kind of the end of the excuses for the most part.
So what do you think, for jurors that are a little bit nervous about coming, what do you expect when you say you have to be at the court at 8 or 8:30, whatever the time is? What should they expect when they first come into the jury summons?
So I think that varies greatly between the counties. Various counties or various judicial districts would do jury orientation, and perhaps that would be done on the front end rather than on the morning of trial. Many of my counties, which are more rural, we do that at the same time as the start of the jury trial. And so, but I think the process is probably very similar. There's going to be an opportunity for them to come in and check in to ensure that they're on the jury panel list. And that's just a simple check-in process so that they know they're in the right spot. And then there's someone there, usually there to greet them and explain, what courtroom you go to and what seat to sit in or what have you. And then typically I would then take over that process and then go into the various questions on a certain qualifications, statutory qualifications to sit as a juror. So I try to place myself into that juror spot. If I'm walking into a courtroom for the first time, and I find many of these men and women, they've never stepped foot in a courthouse. And so it is a very intimidating process. And so our clerks, our judicial assistants try to be there with a warm smile and just a reassuring presence to say, hey, we understand you're a little nervous, but come with us. We'll show you what to do next. And so I think it's important, number one, to have someone there to check them in, make sure that's going well, but then also signage and just simple communication, because they just don't know where to go.
So do you have to know anything about the legal system or the cases before the court before you serve as juror?
No. Other than knowing where to go to, the courthouse or something of that nature, the lawyers are going to ask the questions that they need to ask to find out if you can be impartial in that kind of case. And then your job as a juror is to just listen to the story of whatever the case is as it unfolds, and then listen to the judge as they charge the law to apply to that story. And I find that if I tell jurors, look, just think about this like a puzzle. Think about this as you're hearing this part, you're going to hear another part. You've got to figure out how to put it together. And I once had a juror tell me that being on a jury was one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen and the ugliest all at the same time, because it really is great to see it all come together. And there were a little bit of fights in that jury room, but they came together and made a decision. And once they see how that process unfolds, I've never had a juror tell me anything other than that was one of the most rewarding experiences of their lives, and they were glad they got to do it.
So we talked about being asked questions. Obviously, when you get there, the attorneys are going to ask you questions, and we call that process voir dire. So what is the point of all those questions?
Well, there's a couple of points. The voir dire is a fancy Latin term to tell the truth, and that's all that's required of the jurors. The purpose for voir dire is to determine if there's a potential bias about that juror toward this case or toward one of the parties. It's to kind of ferret that out. That's the court's perspective. That's what we want to know if there's a cousin, if there's something read or heard or seen about this case that they're coming in, and that dovetails into your previous question. We want jurors that come in that know nothing about the case or not enough to sway them one way or the other. Also, we want jurors to come in that are not people that watch NCIS or Law and Order every single night and think they know everything and know how to do DNA analysis in their own head. But that's the purpose of that voir dire, to see if they can be fair in the case. I think in some courts, if judges allow, attorneys use voir dire to kind of do a pre-opening statement to kind of lay the groundwork for their case, and which is fine to a certain extent. But that's the purpose, to see if this juror is a proper candidate to sit on this particular case.
So what kind of questions are jurors typically asked?
First of all, and I do criminal work, and I understand Val does, but the other of us do criminal work, and the state will stand up and they'll read off a list of witnesses that include the parties and the officers and the witnesses. The first question is, do you know any of these people? And in those smaller counties, you're all, yeah, I know Joe. I went to high school with him. I know so and so. He's married to my cousin. Things of that nature.
That happens in big cities too.
Yeah, I mean, it happens a lot, And the next question is, okay, you went to high school with them. It doesn't mean you like them. Do you hate their guts? Is there anything about knowing them that causes you to believe them more than anyone else? So that's usually the starting point. Do you know anything? And then I do the initial questions. Do you know any of the people? Have you heard, read, or seen anything about this case? And do you have anything in your life for the next day, 2, 3, 4, or week that would prevent you from giving your full and complete attention to this case? And if the answer is no to that, then I turn it over to the lawyers. If it's yes, then I'll follow up a little bit, and then I'll give the attorneys an opportunity to.
I ask a few more questions than that. I'd say, tell me your name. Are you married? What does your spouse do? What do you do? Have you ever been on a jury before? And I do primarily civil cases. Every now and then somebody might have a conflict on a criminal case that they'll send over to me. But we ask questions like, do you have an issue awarding money damages and things of that nature? Because a lot of times people think if they're coming for jury duty, it's only about a criminal case because that's what they see on TV and that's what they hear about. And sometimes I think they're a little disappointed when they get to come over and hear about a car accident. But those are things that need a jury as well. So those are the kind of questions you get asked. Have you yourself been in this situation? Do you have any strong feelings about someone asking for money damages to make them whole? Those are the kind of questions that are generally asked just in the beginning about a case like that, or something about money damages.
Most of the questioning is usually done by the lawyers, whether it's criminal or civil, and they have a little bit different perspective on what they're trying to get, they're looking for jurors who are going to identify with their side, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case. And that's fine. That's what they're supposed to be doing. They're advocating for their client. And that's where most of the questions will start coming out. And a juror usually will, as Judge Street said, tell the truth because they don't know what the objective is. They're just answering the question, and then all of a sudden the lawyer will go, Your Honor, we need to approach Mr. So-and-so. I don't think you can be fair on this case. But most of the time, if you take the questioning back over and just say, now, I know you've told us this, but is that going to prevent you from listening to the facts in this case and deciding it fairly? And most of them go, no, I'm good.
So during the discussion between the judges and the attorneys, they'll hear terms like bias and strike for cause and peremptory challenge, and those can be intimidating. So if you hear those words and you don't get seated on the jury, should you be offended?
Absolutely not.
I've never seen a juror that got to go home that said, no, I really would like to stay. No, they like to go.
So I think it's important, and I know all of us at this table make sure that we try to accomplish challenges outside of the presence of the juror being challenged, because that can get very precarious. Because if I were to deny a challenge for cause and they know who it came from, then we're creating perhaps a bias. And so oftentimes judges do it differently, but any challenges for cause, let's say, as I go through the witness list, as was mentioned by Judge Street earlier, and we identify someone that maybe is the next door neighbor of the defendant or what have you, some person has a vested interest in the suit, we will oftentimes, attorneys know in my court to make sure to make that motion at the bench rather than out in the presence of the jury. And so those things do happen. Now, you said the word peremptory challenges. Those typically occur after voir dire is completed, and then we begin that process. And that's done in secret, meaning they do that by paper, and they bring it to me to a challenge those particular jurors. So it is very important to make sure they truly shouldn't hear those words as jurors. That's really just reserved for the court and the litigants.
Those preliminary jury instructions that we have also contain something, just a brief comment about voir dire. And I do that before we start voir dire. And I say, listen, just because a lawyer strikes you today doesn't, they're just thinking you wouldn't be a good juror on this particular case. You may be a perfect juror for another case. And it's the questions like, we have a DUI case and that juror's dad was drunk or their child had a DUI, and they wouldn't be a good juror on a DUI case, but on a burglary or something to that effect, they would be just fine. So you kind of let them know that at the beginning. Cause challenges are pretty evident. That's my first cousin that's sitting there, or the prosecuting officer is married to my sister. Those are they get that. Jurors are very smart. They know if we're going to let them go for a while. Peremptories, we don't give them a reason. We just simply say jurors 2 and 4 are excused. Call back on such and such date. They can usually get that too. And I think what Judge Davies said is really, really true about what lawyers are trying to do. All lawyers and judges we don't have buildings to look at or finished products. We just got war stories. So, I'm sure we'll all hit a few war stories. But 2 weeks ago, I tried a first-degree murder, the death of a 4-year-old child. The father was accused of killing the child, but the mother was not. So the defense made a strong point of trying to kick off every woman off that jury that they possibly could. It was pretty evident. And so finally the state made a Batson challenge, saying it was a discriminatory process that they were using. And it wasn't quite to the level that we look for yet, but I said, counsel, you can give me a reason why you exclude the next one. Well, they didn't exclude any more. But I think some of that gamesmanship kind of goes into that. That person may not be biased, but in the mind of the attorney, they're looking for a certain composition of that jury. Our laws prevent striking all African Americans, or all females or males or some distinct class. But a lot of that goes on, and a lot of it's just guessing by the attorneys as to what they think their jury's supposed to look like to be most favorable to their side.
So what kind of concerns do potential jurors usually bring to the court, and how do you address them? What are some of the common concerns?
Parking. I say that it is an issue. I often have jurors say, "Oh my gosh, I parked on a meter," or "I'm afraid my car is going to get booted or something," and so that or often I'll have people say, well, I have, and this is just a really practical thing, I take medication, I have to use the restroom often, or I'm diabetic, I have to take my medication. And those are the kind of things that I think if you just look kindly and say, let us know what your issues are, we'll take care of them. You just got to tell us, and also give those jurors the opportunity, if they do have an issue that, say, something personal like that, let them come up and talk to you and tell you what it is. And if it's something we can accommodate, we're going to. I think that's probably true of every trial judge in the state. If somebody needs to take their medication at a certain time, we're going to take a break and let you take that. But those are usually the concerns that I have are really real world things, or I've got to pick up my child. I've got to do, whatever they need to do in their normal lives. It's not that they're not wanting to serve. They just need to know that they can also accomplish their everyday tasks.
Child care, as you said, and sometimes you get older jurors who go, my husband's at home and I'm the person who takes care of him, and I'm not sure how I can work that out. That's a pretty legitimate excuse. I mean, you ask questions, is there anybody else who can help you do that? But sometimes it's no. And then you pretty much have to let them go. I have no good answer for that one.
I think it's important to note too, and those that are listening to this podcast, I'd want them to understand to not be afraid to explain to that judge if they do have some need that they can serve, but perhaps I've had this happen before at trial where maybe they had a back procedure recently, and maybe they just need to stand once every hour just to stretch. It doesn't offend me whatsoever if a juror says, Judge Burk, I don't mind serving, but if once an hour, if we can make sure that we stand up and stretch, I'll just say, hey, you just raise your hand and I'll find an appropriate time to take a break, and we'll accomplish that. So we as judges, we want to know if there's some things that we can assist you with while you're serving, because we want you to get that ability to serve and give back, but we also want to meet you in the middle and figure out those things that you need.
I'd like to ask the other judges this question, because I'm a traveling judge and I see different things in different courtrooms. Do you ever get a situation where the jurors come in with these letters from the doctor, but it's the same doctor? I mean, this guy is just making a mint. I ran into that at Jackson, where this is the same doc, same form letter. Because of this condition, I do not think Miss So-and-so will be able to handle jury duty. Do y'all get anything like that?
We had a rash of irritable bowel syndrome up in the 1st District at one time. We cured that real quick, but I called the doctor in and said, let me tell you something. We have bathrooms here, so we have to accommodate that. And but absolutely, the doctors make a fortune when those jury summons are delivered. And I'll answer your other question, and I want the other judges, because that's a great question. I get pay concerns, especially at that initial jury orientation. Like, my employers told me to come here and told me to get out of jury service because I'm their most invaluable employee. I'm their most valuable employee, or I'm not going to get paid. So that's a concern that I see most often. I like his question though, because those doctors make a ton of money.
Yeah, I being in a large area like Memphis, I do see a lot of the same doctors, but I also did personal injury work for about 10 years, so I know most of the doctors around. So I know most of the people that need to be writing a letter like that. So I haven't seen quite what you're talking about in Shelby County, but I did see it in private practice. I heard about it then up in some of the more rural areas. So I know it goes on. I haven't personally seen it in Shelby County. But
So, Judge Street, to try to address some of the concerns, because I've had that same thing. I've had people come to me and say, Judge, I really don't need to miss work today. And I'll ask them why, and it may be some issue with their employer. So I've always tasked my clerks to make sure to create a kind of a checklist or statutory letter that describes the duties of the employer, so that if they did have a juror that ran into that situation, they could be given a copy of that letter and take back to their employer and say, and I'm not saying that employers has ill will, but perhaps they just don't understand their role as an employer and how that folds into jury duty, to make sure if they have X number of employees, they do have to pay them for that time. And so now, in the flip side of that coin is that $11 check was going to go to their employer, right? So to help alleviate that, we do kind of provide some type of letter that lets the employer know, here's your responsibilities.
We got a problem up there in our little corner of this beautiful state because, Virginia and North Carolina are both a stone's throw away. So we got a lot of people that work either in Virginia or in North Carolina who are not subject to our laws of paying them. So we have to ferret that out sometimes too about, we have no power to make them pay, nor any power to cite them into court to scare them to death to make sure they understand. So a lot of those people we excuse from jury duty simply because they're not going to get paid, period.
So once the jury is sat, so we have selected our jury, we've got our jury in the courtroom. What is the role of the jury in a typical proceeding? What are they tasked with doing?
Listening to everything that is said and following the instructions that the judges give. There's a section of the instruction book after a jury is selected and sworn in. Then I think it's titled after voir dire before trial, and you go through and read to them what they're charged with doing. And one of the biggest things that I think anybody listening to this, I always try to make sure people know, is one of the things everybody's instructed to do is the lawyers are instructed not to talk to anybody on the jury. If you see someone and it's a natural thing, especially here in the South, to say, hey, how are you? Well, those lawyers are probably going to run away from you if they see you, because they know if I see them talking to them, then there's going to be problems, and you don't want any appearance of impropriety at all. So basically, after a jury is selected, sworn in, their job is to listen. And if there's any exhibits that they're passed to look at those. They're allowed to take notes during testimony, but mainly it's to listen.
I tell them once they're sworn, they become just exactly like I am. They become a judge, and of course in the criminal cases, and they're the exclusive judge of the facts of the case, and they're read that in the preliminary jury instructions. They're read that in the final jury instructions, and I let them know that you're the only judge of the facts of this case. So if the light is red or green, you decide that. And we tackle that question at the beginning. It's like, oh, I'm not comfortable judging someone. And I answer that. I don't give the lawyers a chance. I say, listen, you judge somebody every single day. You judge your children, you judge your spouse, you judge your coworkers. When they come in and tell you something, you look at them, you look at their mannerisms, you look at if you ask your son, did you eat that cookie? And he says, no, I did not, Daddy. And he's got chocolate chip coming down his mouth, or, you've had 3 people tell you he ate that cookie. That's how you judge somebody. And I said, you do the same thing in this case. You're the exclusive judge of the facts, and you're the judge of the law under the direction of the court. And once they see that, you see the light bulb go off. You're thinking, oh, well, wait a minute here. I got to listen. I've got to pay attention. And I've really got an important role in this.
Yeah, I think it's if you can, we have to realize, boy, these jurors for the most part are probably intimidated by the whole process, and especially you, the judge. And so I try to get them to relax and hey, we're a team here. And I know the lawyers can't talk to you, but I'm always glad to talk to you if you have a question or how you doing the next, I check in on them in the morning, see how everybody's doing. And if you kind of build that rapport with the jury, they want to do their job the right way. But if you treat them like some type of second-class citizen, that will not go well.
So are the decisions that they make, you said they decide the facts in the case, Judge Street, so are the decisions that the jury makes, are they important? Or is the judge going to overturn them? Or is the appellate court just going to overturn them?
Rarely. That's the power we give the juries in the state of Tennessee. And maybe one time in 10 years have I ever, as the 13th juror, not agreed with the verdict of the jury because, there are flaws in the system, but that's still the best fact-finding body that we have as a jury. So I think both by the judge that hears the case and also the strength that our appellate opinions give a jury verdict, I think the opposite is true. You're going to see very few circumstances where a jury verdict is overturned.
In fact, if it's overturned, it's usually the judge's fault.
Yeah, the judges messed something up. That's exactly right.
It's an incredibly high standard. I think we've everybody that tries jury cases will have those motions to undo it, a judgment notwithstanding the jury verdict or something to that effect. We've all had them. I've never had the occasion to go in behind a jury and second guess what they're doing. There's cases on it, and people the lawyers who maybe didn't prevail or didn't get quite what they wanted, try to stretch those cases to come in and maybe have a little bit of a second bite at the apple, but that's the rare situation.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about, we'll end with this question, how you see the jurors' attitudes evolve typically, because you work with jurors every day, or just about every day, from the time they come in from the jury summons at the first day, how does their attitude usually evolve by the time they are done serving as an actual juror?
Well, and I said something about that earlier. I've had jurors tell me everything from, this is beautiful yet ugly, to I once had a juror tell me that serving on a jury had renewed his faith in the country. He said, I did not want to be here. I did not want to stay. Thank you for making me stay. Whenever, and I don't know how everybody's courtroom setup is probably similar. When I'm leaving the jury, it's like my friends are leaving. I'm standing at the back door, shaking hands, giving hugs, thanks for being here. And they're usually very happy at that point and are happy that they were part of the team that got something done. We got a case resolved today. We got something done, and we couldn't have done it without you. So my experience is that jurors have been transformed into believers by the time they leave in how important the system is, and they were glad to be part of it.
Judge Burk, what do you usually see in your courtroom?
Typically, I see those that come in that haven't served before. They're very apprehensive, but by the end of the process, they're very relaxed. They're talking to their fellow jurors, their neighbors. And I typically or always send them a little letter after they serve and telling them thank you for their service. And there have been times I've passed someone in the grocery store and they've said, Judge Burke, I got your letter. Thank you so much for that. But they'll also say, I was scared to death when I walked into that courtroom. But after I served, I really enjoyed that. I found that interesting. I've yet to run into one person that said that was the worst experience of my life. And so oftentimes when I get in a new jury panel, I'll often ask them as a collective group, has anyone ever served on a jury before? And many, not many, but some will raise their hand, and I'll say, now I want you guys to look around. They survived that process, and they're here to talk about it. And that usually brings some levity to the situation, and they realize, okay, I can do this. So, yeah, I have never experienced one where they've said it's the worst experience of my life.
Judge Street?
I'll mirror what my colleagues say. They come in and they've already tried their best to get out of service. They've called the clerks, they've called my office, and they're all told the same thing. I'm sorry, you have to be there. Judge Rice jokes sometimes when she does the orientation in the other counties. She's like, if you come to Judge Street's courtroom, you better have the organ donor cooler beside of you, because that's the only way he's going to let you out. And so we laugh about that. But when they leave, I do the same thing. We pass those cards out, thanking them for their service. We write them a little handwritten note and hand it to them when they leave at the end of a trial date. And I've yet to see one that have said, I hate this. They're all like, wow, that's interesting, or thank you, we see what you do now. So I think they come in with one perception and they leave with another. And I think we as judges, if we do it correctly, that's exactly how it's supposed to be.
Judge Davies?
I think it's interesting. All of these jurors, for the most part, they come in as strangers to each other. And the longer the trial goes, there is a much greater chance that they will form a bond with one another, and sometimes friendships that go beyond the jury duty, because they're all, we have the same goal, working together to come up with their verdict. And that whole process, when it's over, is very satisfying to them, I think.
We did have some jurors, single people, get married after a sequestered jury in Shelby County.
That's a whole
It's
other
happened.
podcast.
It's happened. So if you're single and available, jury duty might be for you.
Okay, we'll end on that note. So
Please do.
Yes. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Tennessee Court Talk.